Hi there, welcome back to the Be the Cake podcast with me, your host, Liz Campbell. And I'm just going to interject right now that you can probably hear traffic noises in the background. That's because I am recording this with the windows open because it's a bright sunny day, it's rather warm, and I like breathing vaguely fresh air. So there's that. And therefore, there's background noise. So today, what I want to talk about is why fear and distrust of pleasure is keeping you broke. Okay. We as human beings are, as a spiritual being, having a human experience with a human physical body, which is capable of experiencing great pleasure as well as pain and all of the other extremes that go with it. We actually have embodied, for a reason, to experience the full 9 yards, the full 9 yards of what it means to be human, basically, which is all about experiencing, feeling, emotions, thoughts, creation, manifestation within 3D, manifestation, ultimately if you're on what I'm going to call the ascension pathway, that's what you're choosing for yourself, then it's actually coming into that space of manifesting in 3D from the fifth dimension, so on and so forth. Okay, and as part of that, pleasure is part of the polarity. Now, it's interesting because we have been born into a society which, for mainly religious reasons, if we're going to be completely honest about it here, has been taught to fear and mistrust pleasure, and to feel guilty and feel shame about pleasure and about feeling it and about pursuing it and about enjoying it, which is all a massive distortion, because in actual fact, and this actually could be a whole other podcast in itself, and in actual fact I've got another episode coming up soon that you might want to keep your eyes peeled for, where I'm going to be diving into that in a whole load of depth. Basically, our fear and distrust of pleasure, which is socio-religiously programmed into us from the earliest age, and essentially is kind of put in place, I'm going to say, from the point of view of looking at it like in terms of societal structures, the system of patriarchy relies very heavily on the idea of shaming women for wanting to enjoy pleasure whilst encouraging men to seek it. So you end up with this kind of dichotomy, if you will, or cognitive dissonance going on between men and women, basically, where men are told to sow their wild oats and yet women are slut shamed, and so on and so forth. And there's this whole like good versus bad, yada yada yada, all of that kind of stuff that goes on. Okay, most people are carrying some kind of energetic hangover of that from their ancestors, even if they weren't brought up within a church or any kind of religious organisation. As I've been explaining already, it gets handed down through the DNA, your epigenetics, which are inherently malleable, basically. They are the key, really, sort of one of the keys, one of the parts of the puzzle, as it were, that you get to actually work with if you want to do the conscious work on this stuff in order to change things. And this is part of what sorting out the ancestral karma is all about, in actual fact, basically changing the effects that you're suffering from the decisions that your ancestors made, which embedded and imprinted so heavily in their DNA that it got handed down to you, and you're running it on autopilot in the background, and it's affecting everything that you're experiencing here and now in today's reality. Okay, and so kind of part of this whole dismantling of the fear and distrust of pleasure is about actually dealing with your ancestors' shit as much as it is about dealing with stuff from your childhood and so on and so forth. But in actual fact, when you look at the whole thing around pleasure and you start to understand that, like, the entire purpose of money is someone that I've basically had popping up on my eyeline quite a lot on Instagram recently has been saying very kind of concisely and succinctly, the purpose of money is to actually create experiences of pleasure. Okay, that's its primary purpose. And if you are mistrustful or distrustful of pleasure, and you know on a deep level that in actual fact, money's greatest power and purpose in life is to create experiences of pleasure. I'm not just talking about from a selfish point of view, but from a societal point of view, from a communal point of view, from within your community, within your family, within your community, within the wider world. It's designed to make life easier, right? And if you feel guilty about having a life of ease and experiencing pleasure, of course you're going to hold yourself apart from money. It only stands to reason that that's what's going to happen. You end up pushing money away because you feel guilty about the idea of having money to spend on pleasurable experiences. It's that fucking simple. So, of course, the two are tied together. You can make this about sex if you want, but pleasure doesn't just mean sex. Pleasure, to take pleasure in something is to enjoy it for its own sake, okay? So in actual fact, our whole kind of thing that we have going on in the modern world where everyone's very busy and they don't stop to smell the roses and they're always rushing around like, I don't know, like someone's set fire to their butt or whatever. And people do things to make money that they don't actually enjoy. And all of this stuff, this is all tied up with this absolute fear of being present and actually taking pleasure in your surroundings, in your relationships, in nature. Now, you might be able to put it to yourself that, like, I really like going out in nature, but then actually you create a life where you never have time to. Where's that coming from? Okay, creating a life where you don't have the time to smell the roses and you're always running around being busy and exhausted. And then you're too tired for sex and you're too tired to cook yourself a nice meal. You're too tired to go out and spend time with your friends socially. Do you see what I'm saying? And generally speaking, the people that are doing that are the ones who are undervaluing their time, charging too little for what they do, giving too much, but not giving from an overflowing cup, giving from a place of exhaustion, giving from a place of resentment, giving from a place of, the energy behind the giving is actually quite toxic and poisonous because they're incapable of actually allowing themselves to rest, allowing themselves to take the time to really enjoy life. When we're talking about pleasure, we're talking about enjoying life, actually having the time to enjoy life. When people talk about, money creating freedom, what it does most of all is if you have a large amount of money, it creates time freedom for you, provided you're allowing it to, because there are people who have a lot of money who do not have this mindset or this specific energy behind it, and they're still creating from a place of lack, even though they've amassed vast amounts of wealth. And you can tell those ones because they're the greedy and the grasping ones in terms of the way they operate. And they're always looking to see where they can get one over on somebody rather than looking to see where they can enrich the lives of others through what they're doing. And actually, I'm going to say speculate to accumulate from a basis of true wealth consciousness. Okay. In actual fact, when you are in that space of really allowing yourself to enjoy what it is that you do, that you have monetized so that it brings you an income, and then you allow the money that you make to actually do nice things for you and the ones that you love and the people around you and the causes that you believe in that you want to support, okay, when you are coming from that space, pleasure is what leads all of it, okay? Because in actual fact, you have pleasure in giving and seeing people's faces light up. You have pleasure in receiving. You have pleasure in living in an expansive and, I want to say, elevated manner where you get to eat the nice organic foods, support the causes that you believe in with your whole heart, and watch things actually change on a societal level as a result of that. You get to dress nicely in clothes that aren't some cheap throwaway shit that have been created through the use of exploitative labour that literally is exploiting small kids in third world countries. And when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about like dressing yourself head to toe in designer labels, because I'm going to say right now, a lot of those designer labels that you see out there are also using exploitative means, just in the same way that Primark and H&M and all of these other companies are doing. Okay, so when you have that when you have a lot of money, in actual fact, if you're coming from true wealth consciousness, you have the time to spend time researching where it is that you are buying your things from, your clothes, etc., and you get to support the ethical production that doesn't destroy the topsoil, society, different communities, etc. Basically, you get to spend your money on that stuff because it's given you the time. So there's pleasure in actually doing the right thing by the planet and by yourself and by your principles. So it's actually a positive self-feeding cycle when you get into this stuff properly. And when you have fear of pleasure and a mistrust or distrust of pleasure, and you are essentially allowing yourself to be rotating on a fear-based hamster wheel, which is all about punishment and pain, which is the equivalent of hell on earth, of course you're going to be broke. And even if you do make some money, it either is not going to stick around, or it's going to be very toxic in terms of the effect it has on your life, generally speaking, because what you're going to spend it on is going to be stuff that is actually designed to destroy you because of that guilt that's feeding everything underneath. Do you see what I'm saying? And this all goes back into what I'm always saying about the fact that, in actual fact, it's the sponsoring energy of anything that you're doing that actually is the thing that amplifies itself through your actions and then basically feeds back to you in a loop. So you could look at it this way: your fear of true pleasure and your distrust of true pleasure not only keeps you broke, it keeps you trapped in hell on earth. It keeps you in a position of self-destruction continuously, on all sorts of levels, and ultimately will lead to your demise and your death. Fairly dramatic, no, but it's true. If you actually look at it, it's true. When you look at people who are genuinely coming from a place of true pleasure in the money that they spend and the reasons why they're spending it, and this feeds through to being naturally generous with people who are really coming from a place of trusting pleasure, also come from a place of trusting money, trusting that they're always looked after, and they tend to be the most altruistic and generous people in the way that they give their time, their money, and their love. Now, it may be that they get people who come into their field sometimes who take advantage of that, and sometimes a little bit of discernment is required actually when you go into that level of being, in terms of understanding how to follow your intuition. And this is yet another podcast topic that I'm going to be talking about in great detail. But in actual fact, your intuition will always be your ally with this stuff, and understanding sort of where people are coming from, being able to read where people are coming from, and understanding that on some level when you are spending money on things, and when you are giving of yourself in an act that is pleasurable, in the act of giving, in actual fact, it's okay to then let go of everything after that. And what people choose to do with your act of generosity is entirely up to them afterwards, after the fact. Okay. And we come back to this thing of like, if you can actually get to a point in your life where you genuinely take pleasure and experience joy in the action of what you're doing without expecting anything to come from it, you are then in a space where you're actually opening yourself up to all of the abundance you could ever wish for, financial, sexual, etc., etc., etc. The issue is that as human beings, we've been taught to make everything very conditional. At the same time, and this is where we have to hold the paradox. It's important to have good self-loving boundaries and know when to say no. Know when it is that we're saying yes to something out of people-pleasing rather than out of genuine coming from a place of overflow. Do you see? So knowing what your hell no is and knowing what your fuck yes is. Really, really, really important. Essentially, fear and distrust of pleasure will prevent you from actually knowing how to say your fuck yes as well as your hell no. It's all tied up together. We come back to this thing of everything is related, everything is connected. When you start to actually understand where you're out of kilter in one area, you start to see how it's affecting everything else. And when you make the adjustment, you start to see the ripples going through every other area of your life where things start to shift. So yeah, if you want to know why it is that you're broke, if you're listening to this and you're wanting to know why it is that you're broke, then you can do a lot worse than muscle testing yourself on the following statements. I am afraid of pleasure. I am mistrustful of pleasure. And if you get a yes response, whether you're using the sway test or the finger pull or the arm muscle test, okay, then you know what it is that you need to start working on. And that's all I have to say for today. If you want to check out ways that you can investigate working with me, you will find the link tree with all the details of all my various offers, products, services, etc. somewhere around this podcast. All you need to do is click on that and have a little look. Mwah. Till next time.